The first day of our watch began under the cold, indifferent gaze of a late autumn sky. Our operatives established a patient, cold vigil outside the apartment complex, a modern, anonymous building that held within its walls a universe of secrets. For hours, the scene was a study in suburban stillness. Cars came and went, residents walked their dogs, the rhythm of ordinary life played out, offering no hint of the drama that was about to unfold. We watched the front door of their unit, a single point of focus in a world of mundane distractions. Deandre's hope, as fragile as it was, still hung in the air. Perhaps this was all a mistake. Perhaps the late-night phone calls were truly innocent. Perhaps Terry was just a friend, and Deandre's own fear was the real antagonist in this story. The quiet of those first few hours allowed that hope to breathe, to exist in a state of suspended animation. Then, in the mid-afternoon, the stillness was broken, the front door opened, and Phoenix Nora emerged. She was dressed in a way that seemed effortlessly chic, a walking embodiment of her own fashion-forward brand. She paused on the doorstep, checking her phone, a small, familiar gesture that felt different when viewed through the long lens of a surveillance camera. Every movement seemed significant, every glance a potential clue. A few moments later, a car we did not recognize pulled into a visitor parking spot. A man stepped out. Even from a distance, we could see the easy confidence in his stride, the casual way he surveyed his surroundings before his eyes locked onto Phoenix. It was Terry Ford. He made his way to her, and as he approached, a smile bloomed on her face, a radiant, unguarded smile that our operatives noted felt different from the one reserved for our client. The first concrete piece of evidence, the first undeniable crack in the foundation of Deandre's hope, came in the form of a simple, devastating gesture. As they began to walk toward her car, their hands found each other. It was not a formal, polite clasp, but a familiar, intertwined locking of fingers, an act of casual intimacy that spoke volumes. It was a gesture that belonged to lovers, a silent declaration of a shared world from which Deandre was explicitly excluded. They walked hand in hand, a picture of carefree coupledom, seemingly oblivious to the invisible eyes that were documenting this quiet betrayal. They reached her sedan, and he opened the passenger door for her, another small courtesy that felt like a twist of the knife. They settled into the car and drove away, leaving behind a silence that was now heavy with the weight of confirmed suspicion. The question was no longer if she was hiding something, but how much. Our team followed at a discreet distance, a ghost in the city's traffic. Their destination was a strip mall in the heart of the fashion district, a place that should have been a temple to Phoenix's craft, her professional world. Instead, it was about to become the stage for the next act of their private drama. They parked and exited the vehicle, masks firmly affixed to their faces, a grim, unwitting symbol of the double life being led. Once again, their hands found each other, a magnetic pull that seemed to operate independently of conscious thought. They moved through the parking lot with a synchronized rhythm, their steps falling into a comfortable cadence. They were performing a parody of domestic bliss, a casual afternoon of shopping and browsing, an activity that Deandre probably believed was a part of the life he was building with her. They entered a trendy clothing boutique, the kind of place where the music is loud and the price tags are high. Through the large glass storefront, our cameras captured them moving through the racks of clothes. He would hold up a jacket, she would laugh and shake her head. She would point to a dress, and he would nod in earnest approval. They were a team, a unit, their bodies in constant, easy communication. At one point, he reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, a gesture so tender and possessive that it felt like a shout in the silent world of surveillance. They were not just friends. Friends do not look at each other that way, with a mixture of admiration and hunger. Friends do not share a bubble of intimacy so thick that the rest of the world seems to fade away. They were orbiting each other, two celestial bodies caught in a private gravitational pull, and the universe they had created for themselves had no room for a man named Deandre. After some time, they emerged from the store, empty-handed, and moved on to another. The pattern repeated itself. The browsing, the shared smiles, the casual touches that were anything but casual. It was a slow, methodical dismantling of Deandre's reality. Each piece of footage was another stone laid on the grave of his trust. Finally, their shopping excursion concluded. They returned to Phoenix's car, their hands still linked. Before getting inside, they paused. In the relative privacy of the vehicle's interior, shielded from the casual glances of passers-by, they shared a full-bodied embrace. It was not a friendly hug. It was a deep, lingering hold, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. It was a jubilant, possessive act, a quiet celebration of their shared time, a stolen moment of intimacy before they had to return to their separate public lives. He kissed the top of her head, a final, damning punctuation mark on the afternoon's activities. They drove back to the apartment complex, the journey a quiet echo of the one they had taken hours earlier. But everything had changed. The air was now charged with undeniable proof. He walked her to her door, the perfect gentleman. They did not embrace again, not out in the open. A brief, knowing look passed between them before he turned and walked back to his car, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. Phoenix watched him go before slipping back inside her apartment, back into the life she shared with another man. The door closed, and the scene returned to its earlier state of mundane stillness. But the quiet was no longer ambiguous. It was the quiet of a crime scene after the perpetrators have fled. But the surveillance on the outside could only ever tell half the story, the public-facing chapter of their affair. To truly understand the depth of the deception, we had to go inside. It was a step Deandre had authorized with a heavy heart, giving our team permission to install discreet cameras within the home he had once considered his sanctuary. It was the ultimate violation of his own privacy, a desperate measure to uncover a truth he was increasingly certain he did not want to find. The cameras were his silent, unblinking eyes, digital ghosts tasked with watching over the life he was no longer a part of, even when he was physically present. The opportunity to see them in action came a few days later. Deandre informed us he would be working late, a predictable part of his schedule that Phoenix had clearly learned to exploit. That evening, the camera in the living room, positioned to cover the main seating area, hummed to life. For a while, the frame was empty. Then, Phoenix entered, sitting on the sectional sofa, the very same one where she and Deandre had likely spent countless nights watching movies and planning their future. She was scrolling through her phone, a picture of casual relaxation, but she kept glancing toward the front door, a subtle but telling sign of anticipation. Then, she performed what could only be described as a magic act. She stood up, walked out of the camera's frame for a moment, and when she returned, she was not alone. She had conjured her companion, Terry Ford, seemingly from thin air. She led him to the sofa, a silent invitation into the heart of her home with Deandre. He settled onto the cushions next to a woman who was not his, in a home that was not his, with an air of absolute entitlement. The atmosphere immediately shifted. The easy familiarity we had witnessed at the mall was now amplified in the intimacy of the private space. They sat close, their conversation inaudible but their body language screaming its intent. Phoenix, it was now clear, was the director of this sordid play. She was the desideratum, the object of desire, and she reveled in the role. She leaned into him, her hand resting on his knee, her laughter a silent tremor on the screen. And then, the scene escalated into something far more damning. As they talked, she shifted her position, moving with a liquid grace until her head was resting in his lap. He in turn began to stroke her hair, his fingers moving slowly, rhythmically. It was a scene of profound and sickening intimacy, a desecration of a shared space. That sofa was a symbol of her life with Deandre, and she had just transformed it into a stage for her infidelity, a throne for her betrayal. The camera watched, a cold, objective witness, as she worked a different kind of magic in his lap, her witchcraft of seduction on full display. The image was a brutal annihilation of the illusion of her fidelity, a stark, irrefutable portrait of her deception. Under her spell, he was putty in her hands. After a few more minutes of this silent, intimate exchange, she lifted her head. She whispered something to him, and a slow smile spread across his face. She stood up and extended her hand to him. It was an invitation. He took it without hesitation. She led him, hand in hand, just as she had at the mall, away from the sofa and toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, to their bedroom. The camera's view was limited, and we could only watch as they disappeared from the frame, two figures walking toward an unseen but easily imagined destination. They had crossed the final threshold. They had taken their betrayal into the most sacred space in the home, the bedroom she shared with the man who was, at that very moment, working to provide for their future. The living room remained empty for a long time, a silent testament to the act that was occurring just out of sight. The stillness was thick with the ghost of their actions. Then a sudden, sharp vibration shattered the quiet. It was Phoenix's phone, left behind on the coffee table. A text message lit up the screen. The message itself was invisible to the camera, but its effect was instantaneous and dramatic. A moment later, Phoenix scurried back into the frame, her face a mask of sudden panic. She snatched the phone, her eyes wide as she read the message. It was clear what had happened. Deandre was on his way home. The spell was broken. Her magical, clandestine world was about to collide with her reality. The seductress was gone, replaced by a panicked conspirator. She darted back down the hallway, and a moment later, a flustered Terry Ford emerged, hastily tucking in his shirt. Phoenix was right behind him, ushering him toward the front door with frantic, whispered instructions. He was out the door in seconds, vanishing into the night. Phoenix then performed her final trick. She smoothed her hair, straightened a cushion on the sofa, and took a deep, calming breath, composing herself just in time to greet the man she had just so thoroughly betrayed. The curtain fell on her performance just as the sound of a key in the lock could be heard. The brazenness of the act was stunning. To bring another man not just into their home but into their bedroom was a level of disrespect that defied easy comprehension. It demonstrated a coldness, a calculated disregard for Deandre's feelings that was far more chilling than a simple, impulsive mistake. This was a pattern. This was a strategy. This was a double life, meticulously curated and ruthlessly executed. The footage of their near miss, of Terry's hasty, panicked exit just moments before Deandre's return, was a particularly cruel piece of the puzzle. It showed that Phoenix was not just a cheater, she was a skilled performer, an actress capable of switching from seductress to devoted girlfriend in the blink of an eye. The image of her composing herself, smoothing her hair and preparing her welcoming smile was a masterclass in deception. She was living in a world of her own making, a world built on a foundation of lies, and she was the undisputed queen of her fraudulent kingdom. Our surveillance had to continue. A single incident, no matter how damning, was still just a single incident. To present the full, unvarnished truth to Deandre, we needed to show him the scope of this betrayal. We needed to demonstrate that this was not an anomaly but the new normal. So our teams kept their watch, and the cameras inside the apartment remained vigilant, their unblinking lenses waiting for the next scene in Phoenix's ongoing play. We did not have to wait long. Just 2 days later, the pattern repeated itself, though this time with a new theatrical twist. Deandre was out for the evening, a scheduled event he had told Phoenix about weeks in advance. It was the perfect window of opportunity, a guaranteed block of uninterrupted time for her and her companion. As evening fell, Terry Ford once again arrived at the apartment. This time there was no pretense of a casual visit. He let himself in with a key. The implications of this single, simple act were staggering. A key signified a level of access and entitlement that went far beyond a casual friendship. It meant he could come and go as he pleased. It meant their home was also, in a sense, his home. He was not just a visitor in Deandre's world. He was a resident, an occupying force who had been granted citizenship by the person Deandre trusted most. He walked in with the casual air of a man returning to his own domain, shedding his jacket and making himself comfortable on the sofa that was rapidly becoming the primary stage for their affair. Phoenix emerged from the bedroom a few moments later, and it was immediately clear that this evening was to be a performance. She was dressed to impress, wearing a striking, form-fitting dress that our investigators would later learn was one of her own, recent designs. She was not just wearing an outfit, she was playing a role. She struck a pose for him, turning slowly, allowing him to take in the full effect of her creation and of herself. The fashion designer was now the model, and Terry was her captivated audience of one. He watched her with an appreciative, hungry gaze, his eyes tracing the lines of the dress and the woman within it. He was not just an admirer, he was a critic, a judge, and his approval was clearly what she craved. The scene that unfolded was a bizarre and intimate fashion show. Excited for his input, Phoenix unveiled her design du jour, the dress she was wearing. She explained the cut, the fabric, the inspiration behind it, her hands gesturing with the passion of a true artist. Terry, in turn, played his part to perfection. He rose from the sofa and approached her, his examination of the garment far more thorough than that of a typical friend. His hands followed hers, touching the fabric, his fingers brushing against her waist, her back, his touch a professional critique that was undeniably personal. He asked her to turn again, to walk, his gaze intense and analytical. He was not just looking at the dress, he was consuming her. The entire display was an elaborate act of foreplay, a seduction disguised as a business consultation. The language of fashion had become the language of their affair. Then, he delivered the line that would escalate the performance to its inevitable climax. "Not sure it's a perfect fit," he seemed to say, a playful challenge in his eyes. He asked her for a fashion show, a private viewing of her other works. The request hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. With her companion now hyped for Fashion Week, Phoenix's eyes lit up with a mischievous glint. She gave a small, conspiratorial smile and then exited the frame, heading back toward the bedroom. The camera in the living room held on Terry, who waited with the patient anticipation of a man who knows exactly what is coming next. He was a spectator waiting for the main event, and he did not have to wait long. When Phoenix returned, she was a different woman. She had shed the elegant dress, the piece de resistance of her collection. In its place, she was wearing nothing but delicate, intimate attire. She was flaunting her lingerie, a black lace ensemble that left little to the imagination. This was the true fashion show. This was the private exhibition he had requested. She stood in the doorway for a moment, a silhouette of seduction, before giving him a slow, deliberate smile. She beckoned him with a single finger. She invited him into her bedroom for the private show. He rose from the sofa without a word and followed her, a willing and eager participant in her final, most intimate presentation. They disappeared from view, leaving the living room empty once more, a silent, hollow space that bore witness to the echoes of their transgression. Sometime later, the bedroom door opened again, but this time only one figure emerged. It was Terry Ford, alone. He walked back into the living room, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He picked up his jacket, glanced one more time toward the bedroom, and then let himself out of the apartment, the quiet click of the lock a final, definitive sound. Phoenix did not re-emerge. The camera held on the empty room, the stage now barren, the actors having departed. The performance was over. Their abominable act was now complete. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of visual proof that was as irrefutable as it was heartbreaking. Our surveillance was complete. We had captured the full, devastating narrative of Phoenix's betrayal. We pulled up stakes, our operatives retreating from their cold vigil. The next step was to prepare the dossier for Deandre. The process of compiling the evidence is always a somber, methodical task. Each photograph, each video clip, is a piece of a story that will irrevocably alter a person's life. We laid it all out. The hand-holding at the mall, the tender embrace in the car, the chilling intimacy of the scene on the sofa, and the final, brutal confirmation of the bedroom fashion show. The footage was a silent, damning indictment. It told a story of a love that had been betrayed, a trust that had been systematically dismantled, and a future that had been stolen. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt, no possibility of a misunderstanding. Phoenix Nora was living a double life, and Terry Ford was her willing co-conspirator. The only person left in the dark was Deandre Bradford. Our job was now to turn on the lights. We arranged to meet Deandre at a neutral location, a sterile, impersonal production office that would soon become the crucible for his emotional transformation. Riddled with uncertainty, he arrived looking like a man walking to his own execution. The hope that had been flickering in his eyes just a few days ago was now all but extinguished, replaced by a grim, weary resignation. He knew why he was there. He knew that we would not have called him in if we had found nothing. But knowing something and seeing it are two vastly different things. He steeled himself for the cold, hard truth, his broad shoulders squared, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was preparing for a blow he knew was coming, but for which no man can ever be truly prepared. Peter Pankey, our host and the designated messenger of these difficult truths, met him with a quiet, professional empathy. "Deandre, what up, man?" The greeting was casual, but the gravity of the situation was palpable. Peter's approach is direct, a swift and clean removal of the bandage. "You reached out to cheaters. You know what we do at Cheaters, we do our due diligence. You wouldn't be here if we didn't have anything." The words were a final confirmation, a verbal prelude to the visual assault that was about to begin. The screen in front of them flickered to life. "Want to check it out?" Peter asked. Deandre gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the screen. The show was about to begin. The first images to appear were from the first day of surveillance. There was Phoenix, walking out of their apartment. And then, there was Terry, walking beside her, their hands intertwined. Hold on, Deandre said, his voice a low growl. "That's Terry." The name was a curse on his lips. Peter confirmed it, his tone even and factual. Walking out, holding hands with her, Terry. Deandre's denial was immediate, a reflex action against the visual proof. "Hell no, that ain't my man, that's supposed to be one of her partners." He was trying to rationalize, to fit the impossible image into a familiar, non-threatening narrative. But the footage was relentless. It showed them getting into the car, driving to the mall, their hands still locked. It showed them shopping, their bodies close, their intimacy undeniable. "So he knows you're 6'3", 200-something pounds?" Peter asked, a pointed question designed to highlight the sheer audacity of Terry's actions. Deandre's response was a volcanic eruption of rage. "This bitch-ass knows if I get my hands on him it's a wrap." The veneer of calm had shattered. The wounded man was gone, replaced by a warrior whose territory had been invaded. The footage continued, each clip another blow, the embrace in the car, the return to the apartment. "Yikes," Peter murmured, a simple, understated acknowledgement of the scene's painful impact. Then came the evidence from inside the home, the footage from the cameras he had authorized. The screen showed Terry, in his dress pants, getting up close and personal with Phoenix on their sofa. Deandre's reaction was a string of guttural no's, a desperate, repeated attempt to reject the reality being presented to him. No. That's cap. It was the cry of a man whose world was being deconstructed before his very eyes. The final, devastating sequence began. The fashion show. Deandre recognized the dress immediately. "What you mean?" "I was right there when she made that bitch." The statement was a testament to his support, his involvement in her dream, a dream she was now using as a prop in her affair. He watched in stunned silence as she spun for Terry, as she disappeared and re-emerged in the lingerie. He watched as Terry followed her into their bedroom. Sometime later, he leaves the room. "Notice, it's only him. You know why she ain't leaving the room?" Peter's question was rhetorical, a final, brutal nail in the coffin of Deandre's trust. The screen went dark. The evidence had been presented. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Deandre's ragged breathing. The sorrow, the shock, the betrayal, it all coalesced into a singular, explosive point of rage. He lunged at the monitor, a primal scream tearing from his throat, his fist connecting with the screen in a shower of plastic and glass. It was a raw, unfiltered explosion of pain, a physical manifestation of his shattered heart. His grief had found its voice, and that voice was violence. His beef was not with the screen, of course, but with the man on it. His rage was now a guided missile, and it had found its target. The time for surveillance was over. The time for watching from the shadows had passed. It was time for a confrontation. Peter, ever the calm in the storm, redirected the energy. "I need you to channel this energy towards the man that's with your lady right now." The fuse had been lit. The only thing left to do was to point the explosion in the right direction. "I know where she's at right now," Peter said. "Let's pull up." The drive to the confrontation is always a journey through a unique and volatile landscape of human emotion. For Deandre, it was a silent, simmering inferno. He sat in the passenger seat of the van, a monolith of coiled tension, his eyes fixed on the blur of the city lights outside the window. He was a man transformed. The gentle giant, the supportive partner who had spoken of his love with such poetic reverence, was gone. In his place sat a man hollowed out by betrayal and filled back up with a righteous, white-hot fury. Every red light was an insult, every slow-moving car a personal affront. The world was moving at a normal pace, but his heart and mind were hurtling forward at the speed of rage. He was a storm front rolling through the city, and Phoenix's design studio was the epicenter toward which he was inexorably drawn. Peter Pankey sat beside him, a calm, steadying presence in the eye of the hurricane. His role had shifted from investigator and messenger to that of a crisis manager, a guide through the treacherous terrain of confrontation. He spoke to Deandre in low, even tones, not to quell his anger, but to help him focus it. Now's the time to get your answers. Get your answers. All right? It was a mantra, a reminder that the goal was not just destruction, but clarity. But Deandre's response was a low, chilling promise, a vow made to himself and to the universe. I'm going to get them. I'm going to get everything I need. Somebody's going to feel me tonight. There was no doubt in his voice. The reckoning was coming. The scales were about to be balanced, and the currency of that balancing would be pain. They pulled up to the studio, a chic, industrial space in a converted warehouse district. The lights were on inside, casting a warm, inviting glow onto the dark street. Through the large plate glass window, a scene of domestic and creative bliss was on display. Phoenix was there, animatedly showing Terry a bolt of fabric. They were laughing, their heads close together, completely absorbed in their shared world. They were blissfully unaware that their private bubble was about to be violently burst. They were two actors in a play, about to be confronted by a member of the audience who had just discovered the script was a lie. The cheater's van, a dark chariot of vengeance, rolled to a stop. The side door slid open with a percussive thud that sounded like a starting gun. "Let's go," Peter said. And the storm made landfall. The moment the studio door burst open was a moment of pure, unadulterated chaos. The serene, creative atmosphere shattered into a million pieces. Deandre was the first one through the door, a force of nature, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. "Hey, what the hell?" Terry's voice was a mixture of confusion and alarm. Phoenix's head snapped up, her laughter dying in her throat, her eyes widening in sheer, uncomprehending terror. What the? Oh my God. The world she had so carefully constructed, the one where her two lives ran on parallel tracks that never intersected, had just collapsed in on itself in a spectacular, violent implosion. Deandre's rage was a laser, and it was pointed directly at Terry. He bypassed Phoenix as if she were a ghost, his entire being focused on the man who had invaded his home and his life. The confrontation was not verbal, not at first. It was brutally, viscerally physical. He lunged at Terry, and the sounds that followed were the sickening, percussive sounds of a one-sided fight. Yelling, swearing, the thud of fists against flesh. Terry, caught completely off guard, could do little more than try to shield himself from the onslaught. It was the raw, primal fury of a man defending his territory, a man whose heart had been broken and whose pride had been shredded. The cameras, now inside the chaos, struggled to keep up, their lenses capturing a dizzying, handheld ballet of violence and recrimination. Peter and the security team moved in quickly, pulling Deandre off of Terry, creating a fragile, temporary buffer zone. "Your beef is with him. I'd be upset too. Your beef ain't with me." Peter's words were a desperate attempt to de-escalate the physical violence and pivot toward a verbal confrontation. It was time for answers, not just retribution. Deandre, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing, finally turned his attention to Phoenix. He looked at the woman he loved, the woman who had just shown him everything, and the question that erupted from him was a raw wound. "What is you? It's beyond friends. We already know." Phoenix, her face pale with shock, attempted to weave a new lie, to patch the gaping hole in her narrative. "We're not doing anything. I promise." But the lie was pathetic, an insult to his intelligence, in the face of the mountain of evidence he had just witnessed. Deandre was not listening. He was locked onto Terry again, who was now being questioned by another member of the team. "We had an eye on you, right? And we're looking at footage of you and his lady man." Terry's defense was as weak as Phoenix's. "You know he's my friend. So I don't know why you're acting like this, like what's going on? Like cameras and stuff?" He was playing the part of the bewildered innocent, the victim of a misunderstanding. The performance was so audacious, so patently false, that it only served to pour gasoline on Deandre's already raging fire. "You're a clown. That's what it is. You and that bitch." The confrontation devolved into a chaotic three-way argument, a symphony of accusation and denial. Phoenix tried to claim the moral high ground, positioning herself as the victim of Deandre's invasion of her privacy. "Why do you got these cameras in here? This is so embarrassing." It was a classic deflection, an attempt to make his reaction to her betrayal the central issue, rather than the betrayal itself. But Deandre was a man who had seen the unvarnished truth, and he was immune to her manipulations. "I loved you," he said, the words simple, powerful, and utterly heartbreaking. He was no longer just a warrior, he was a casualty, and his wounds were on full display for everyone to see. The pivotal moment in the confrontation came when Deandre demanded the footage. "Where's the damn footage? Where's Peter at?" He wanted them to see what he had seen. He wanted to force them to confront the visual proof of their lies. Peter obliged, holding up a tablet displaying a key piece of evidence, the two of them, Phoenix and Terry, disappearing into his bedroom. "Look at this. Look at this. What the is Terry doing in my bedroom?" The question was a gut punch, a direct hit that left no room for denial. For the first time, Phoenix was silenced. Her web of lies had been burned away by the harsh light of incontrovertible truth. Terry, seeing the game was up, tried to retreat. "I'm going to walk away. You know what I'm saying?" "It ain't nothing, bro. That's on you, bro." He was a coward, a thief who, when caught, simply drops the stolen goods and tries to walk away whistling. With her co-conspirator abandoning her, Phoenix was left to face the storm alone, and so she deployed her final weapon, blame. She turned the tables, not with denial, but with justification. She painted herself not as a cheater, but as a neglected woman, a victim of Deandre's ambition. "You're mad because I've been spending time with him, and not with you because you're always busy. Your job is way more important than spending time with me." It was a desperate, calculated move, an attempt to reframe her infidelity as a consequence of his failure. "You're a clown," he repeated, the word now his final judgment on her character. Get this girl a red-nosed boy. His heart was broken, but his clarity was absolute. Peter Pankey, ever the facilitator, stepped in with the final piece of the puzzle. Audio. "We got you two in the bedroom." Lie again. The existence of an audio recording was a checkmate. There was nowhere left for her to run, no lie left for her to tell. And so, her strategy shifted again. She moved from justification to a plea for sympathy, a performance of the wounded partner. "You're always busy. You never have time for me. When I told you about my fashion designs, you write it off like it's nothing to you." Deandre's response was a cry of pure, unadulterated pain. "I write it off? Woman, I supported your dreams." He had been her champion, her believer, and she was now using that very support as a weapon against him, twisting his dedication into a narrative of neglect. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The confrontation had run its course. The truth was out, ugly and undeniable. The lies had been exposed, and the justifications had been revealed as hollow and self-serving. The room was a wreckage of a relationship, littered with the debris of broken trust and shattered promises. The energy began to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, sorrowful exhaustion. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold ashes of what used to be love. Hey, we gotta break this up, we gotta go." It was time to extract Deandre from the emotional war zone. As they prepared to leave, Phoenix made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation, to piece together the life she had just so thoroughly demolished. "Deandre, we done build so much together. I don't want to throw it away." It was a plea for a past that no longer existed, a request to rebuild a foundation that she herself had turned to dust. Peter, seeing the opening, asked her a final, pointed question. "What is it about Terry that you like?" Her answer was perhaps the most honest thing she had said all night. He's just sensitive. He listens to me more, he pays more attention to me, he does everything I ask him to do." In that moment, the entire tragedy was laid bare. She had traded a kingdom for a trinket. She had sacrificed a deep, foundational love for the fleeting gratification of easy attention. Deandre heard her words, and for him, it was the final eulogy for their relationship. "Take me to the crib, man," he said, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound, soul-deep weariness. The fight was over. All that was left was the long, lonely process of cleaning up the wreckage. The cameras were lowered. The lights were cut. And 3 lives were left permanently, irrevocably changed. The aftermath of a storm is a landscape of eerie, unsettling quiet. The wind dies down, the rain stops, but the evidence of the chaos remains. Uprooted trees, shattered windows, the wreckage of what once stood strong. So it is with the aftermath of a broken heart. The shouting ends, the tears dry, but the internal landscape is forever altered. For Deandre Bradford, the drive away from Phoenix's studio was a journey through that quiet, devastated terrain. The fire of his rage had been extinguished, doused by the cold, hard reality of Phoenix's final confession. What was left was not anger, but a vast, hollow emptiness. He was a man who had built his house on what he believed to be solid rock, only to discover it was sand, and the tide had just washed it all away. He did not speak. He simply stared out the window, his reflection a ghostly passenger keeping pace with the van. He was no longer seeing the city lights. He was replaying the highlight reel of his betrayal, a horror film projected onto the canvas of his memory. The clasped hands, the intimate embrace, the scene on his sofa, the final, unforgivable march into their bedroom. And her words, her final damning words about Terry, "He's just sensitive, he listens to me more." Each memory was a fresh wound, a new layer of pain laid upon the old. He had fought for her, supported her, believed in her. He had seen her as a queen and had dedicated himself to building her a kingdom, and she had traded it all for a court jester who told her what she wanted to hear. The silence in the van was not empty. It was filled with the deafening sound of a future crumbling into dust. In the days that followed, Deandre moved through the world like a ghost. He returned to the apartment they had shared, but it was no longer a home. It was a museum of a dead relationship. Every object held a memory, and every memory was now tainted. The sofa where they had laughed was now the stage where she had betrayed him. The kitchen where he had cooked for her was a reminder of a life that was a lie. And the bedroom, their sanctuary, was now a desecrated space, a tomb. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, packing his belongings into cardboard boxes. Each item, a book, a photograph, a piece of clothing, was a relic from a past he no longer recognized. He was not just packing his things, he was performing an archaeological dig on his own life, trying to figure out where the truth ended and the deception began. He agreed to one final conversation with us, a post-mortem on the death of his love. The man who sat before our cameras this time was different from the one we had met before. The flicker of hope was gone, as was the explosive rage. In their place was a profound, bone-deep sadness, the quiet grief of a man who had lost not just a partner but a part of himself. "She played me for a fool," he said, his voice low and steady, stripped of all emotion. "I'm glad she's gone." It was a statement of survival, a declaration of independence from the pain she had caused. He expressed a quiet, sincere apology to Peter for his violent outburst, an acknowledgement of the moment his pain had spilled over into uncontrolled rage. He then thanked our organization, not with joy, but with the grim gratitude of a patient thanking a surgeon for a painful but necessary amputation. We had cut away the diseased part of his life, and now he was left with the long, arduous task of healing. He was rising from the ashes, not as a phoenix, but as a man forged in fire, stronger and wiser, but forever scarred by the flames. We reached out to the other actors in this tragedy for their final words. Phoenix Nora, when she finally spoke to our producers, denied any malicious intent. Her words were a tapestry of self-pity and justification. Anything that happened with Terry was a mistake, she claimed. I love Deandre. Her definition of love, it seemed, was a flexible, self-serving thing. She had retreated from the wreckage of her life in the city and was now staying with her parents, a child returning home after her adult world had proven too difficult to navigate. She was reassessing her next move, a designer whose greatest creation, her intricate double life, had come apart at the seams. She was left with nothing but scraps and regret, a lonely artist in a room full of broken mirrors. And Terry Ford, the catalyst, the sensitive man who listened so well, he offered a brief, chillingly casual epitaph for the affair. It was fun, he told our producers over the phone, his voice tinged with an almost sociopathic detachment, but it wasn't worth almost losing my eye over. For him, this entire, life-altering saga was little more than a dalliance, a risky adventure that had ended with a bit too much drama. He felt no remorse, no guilt, only the inconvenience of having been caught. He was a man who moved through the world taking what he wanted, with no regard for the wreckage he left in his wake. He was a ghost, leaving behind haunted houses in the hearts of others before moving on to his next haunting. He was in the end exactly what Deandre had called him, a clown. But the joke he had played was not funny, and the laughter had come at a terrible, terrible cost. And so, the story concludes, as all such stories do, not with a neat resolution, but with a fractured, uncertain peace. The relationship is over. The lovers have parted. The third man has vanished back into the shadows from whence he came, but the echoes of this betrayal will linger for a long, long time. Deandre will have to learn to trust again, to believe that not all love is a lie, that not all devotion is a performance. It is a long road, a difficult pilgrimage from the desolate wasteland of betrayal to the distant shores of healing. Phoenix will have to confront the truth of her own actions, to look at her reflection and see not the victim she wishes to be, but the architect of her own destruction. And Terry will, in all likelihood, learn nothing at all. This program, in the end, is dedicated to the faithful. It is a testament to those who understand that love is not a feeling, but a choice. It is a daily decision to honor, to protect, and to cherish the heart that has been entrusted to you. And it is presented to the false-hearted, not as a judgment, but as a cautionary tale. It is a stark reminder that the thrill of a secret is fleeting, but the consequences of a lie can last a lifetime. Every action has a reaction, every choice has a cost. And in the world of human hearts, there is no debt more costly, and no bankruptcy more absolute, than the loss of trust. Remember that every hidden text, every whispered lie, every stolen moment is a thread being pulled from the tapestry. And if you pull enough threads, no matter how beautiful the original design, you will eventually be left holding nothing but ruins. The surveillance may end, the cameras may be turned off, but the truth, always and forever, will find its way into the light.